My mom passed away on Friday, December 13th at 90 years old, and as she said, she lived a good and full life. In this very special episode of the iCantCU podcast, I'll tell you a few stories, even throw in some Hernandez Tone.
From Studio C, welcome to the iCantCU podcast with David. He can't see, but he's got a lot to say and a face for radio.
Hello and welcome to episode 53 of the iCantCU podcast. My name is David, at David Benj on all the socials. I've been doing a little more on Instagram, but of course, if you want to really connect with me and go back and forth with me, Twitter is the best place to find me. Again, at David Benj on all the socials. In fact, you can even listen to this podcast now on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. And again, of course, that's youtube.com/David Benj. And again, it's been a sad week or so for us here because on Friday, the 13th of December, my mom passed away at 10:22 p.m., which is kind of funny at the time. And it's been something that actually when I was a kid, I used to not make fun of her, but think it was a little weird. And of course, now I do it as well. And Jane makes fun of me for it. We would be walking into the mall or walking into a supermarket or whatever, and my mom would be looking at the license plates. Sometimes she'd read off a funny, in Pennsylvania, plates are usually 3 letters and then 4 numbers. And I think when I was a kid, I think it was 3 letters and then 3 numbers. And of course, you always can have vanity plates, but my mom would read the different combinations of numbers or say, oh, look, this one spells something. But she always had this thing for, a pattern of numbers or something like that. Well, again, I mentioned she passed away at 10:22. That's actually the last 4 digits of her phone number. So I thought that was kind of funny. Another thing that I never told her, at least I don't think I told her, and I realized this at some time since my dad died, my parents had bought plots in the cemetery that they're now both in, along with my uncle and my aunt. And my Uncle Herman died in 1970. He's all the way to the left. And then my Aunt Edie died in 1998. That was 28 years later. And then my dad died in 2012, which was 14 years later. And I realized at some point, whether it was around the time of my dad's death or at a different time, that the way things were going, my mom was going to die in 2019. And of course, I didn't know that it was going to come true. And I don't believe I ever mentioned it with her. I mean, towards the end, she certainly knew that she was coming to the end because she told me, she said, I'm okay with it. I've lived a good, full life. And so sure enough, again, right near the end, but she did pass in 2019. So basically, my uncle died, and then 28 years later, my aunt died. Then half of that, 14 years later, my dad died. And then half of that, 7 years later, my mom died. And I just think that's just kind of interesting. I don't think it means anything. I just think it's kind of funny. But again, it was not unexpected. My mom's been in failing health for quite a while, but she never let that stop her. Up until almost 2 years ago, she was still wanting to go out. Well, actually, even a few weeks ago, she mentioned to me, she said, yeah, I'd like to go to the store, maybe to Kohl's or to Boscov's, and I could use a new pair of pants. And I didn't say it out loud. And again, she knew that, the end was coming, but, she still had the had the idea of wanting to go shopping and get a pair of pants. And I think part of the problem with her, she was pretty tiny by the time she died. She probably weighed, I don't know what she weighed at her last weigh-in, but she weighed in the 80s for the last couple of years. Maybe there was a month or two where she hit 90 pounds. But for the most part, she was in the 80s. And when things were really bad, she was down near 80 pounds. She's had a couple of bouts of whatever was going on with her over the last almost 2 years that she's been in assisted living, that we thought, is this it type of thing. And, she's come through, she came through that. But, as we were sitting and talking, and I spent a lot of time with her over the last few weeks, including the last day. It was to the point where, the doctor had come in and again, I, of course, never had any idea of when's it going to happen and how's it going to happen. And the doctor kind of explained stuff to us. And she said that as things go on, this is what's going to happen, and her breathing's going to get heavier because she's trying to get as much oxygen as she can, which she was hooked up to an oxygen machine. So, the fact that she just wasn't getting enough, that was a sign the doctor said that, things were, coming to an end. And the last few days of her life, it was, I don't want to say a roller coaster, because again, we knew that it was coming. But for example, I went out there on Tuesday and, when I got out there, both aides that my mom loved were in with her, Jen and June. And June wasn't working. June was just out there sitting with her. And Jen had asked me when I walked in, did they call you? And I said, who called me? I said, I didn't get a call from anyone. She said, oh, hospice. And she said, well, if you didn't get a call, everything's okay. And I said, what do you mean everything's okay? And she said, no, you don't need to worry about it. And then later on, it turns out as Jen and June were talking, evidently on Tuesday, my mom woke up and was in a great deal of pain, but worse, was almost blue from a lack of oxygen. And, they really thought that was it. And Jen and my mom were talking, and my mom said, please have June come in. So, of course, June came in. Again, my mom loved these two just as much as any friends that she's had throughout her life. And they were so good to her. And so that it was nice that when either of them weren't on, a lot of times they'd come in and sit with her and visit with her. And, but Tuesday, by the time I got there and I walked in the room, I said, hey, Mom, how's it going? Actually, I said, hey, Ma, and I'll get to that in a second. And she's like, hi, blah, 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 blah. And we started talking, and she's joking with June and Jen and myself. And, every so often, obviously Jen had to leave to go tend to the other patients that are on the floor where the wing that my mom was down up on the third floor at Rose Court. And, so then it was just June and I. And again, my mom is joking with us, talking with us. And some other people came in to visit with her. At one point, I was in there, my mom was in there, and there were Jen and June and a girl named Hazel and a girl named Rosie. And Hazel was one that my mom didn't necessarily know well, but over the time my mom's been in Rose Court, Liz and I got to know Hazel because Hazel used to be the person at the front desk. And, so obviously we would see her every time we, would come and go from visiting with my mom. And, usually we were there once a week, a lot of times twice a week, because we'd go out on Tuesday. Sometimes we'd run to Costco. Costco was very close to that, to where my mom was. And, so if we were out there, we would stop in and see her. Or my mom was pretty particular about food, and she didn't really like it there. So if we were going out there, I'd call and see if she needed something for dinner. And, so we would see Hazel fairly often, although now that I think about it, I think Hazel was off on Tuesdays. But Hazel and Liz and I, got to know each other, over the couple of years. For example, Hazel, who is from Jamaica, loves country music. And I had walked in once to Rose Court, and I'm like, oh my God, why is country music always playing when we come in here? I am not a fan of country music. And she said, what, you don't like country music? I'm like, no, not at all. And she's like, oh, put something else on. I said, look, we're just passing through here, it's okay. Whoever was watching it. She said, what do you mean whoever was watching it, listening to it? I'm listening to it. I said, you like country music? And she said, yes. And I said, aren't you Jamaican? And she said, yes. She said, oh, I like reggae too, but I love country, she said. And I just, that always stuck with me. And a lot of times with my mom, we'd run and get her stuff from Target or, again, go out to get her something for dinner. And we'd always ask Hazel, do you want something? Or, when we came back in, we'd bring stuff and, maybe it was, maybe we got my mom some candy and we'd offer Hazel, hey, do you want, we got some, Hershey bars. Oh, no, I don't like chocolate. So they were the two big takeaways. She doesn't like chocolate. And here's maybe the only Jamaican that likes country music. I don't know. Maybe it's big there. I don't know. But so we're in the room, my mom and I and the, Jen and June and Hazel and Rosie. Rosie is also Jamaican. Jen is Jamaican, and Hazel said, "Yeah, look, you got 3 Jamaicans here." And I said, "Yeah," I said, "that's interesting." I said, "And I know June is from Trinidad." I said, "The thing that I don't understand is, all you guys are from beautiful islands, but yet you're here, and the one place I'd like to go is a beautiful island." And we all laughed, and my mom was laughing, and given Jen and June, kind of giving them the what for, because that was that was her thing in general. And the difference between Jen and June, it seemed like Jen gave it right back to her. June, not as much. It was almost like a, and they just got along so well that, my mom really enjoyed it. And I knew that if Jen and June weren't on, I was, there were a few other aides that, were very good to my mom out there as well. But there were also a couple that, my mom rubbed the wrong way or rubbed my mom the wrong way, and they just didn't mix. There were a couple that she battled with, and it made me a little nervous because I didn't know what kind of care my mom was going to get when those others who she didn't care for much were out there. But towards the end, when I was out there, it was mostly the folks that were that my mom liked and that were, very good to my mom and with my mom. And, when my mom moved into Rose Court to the assisted living, and Rose Court is a building, I don't know how many units are in it, and they're set up kind of like, almost like a hospital room without all the equipment and whatnot. And you can bring your own furniture, and my mom did have her own furniture to bring in. And she put up her own pictures and, the shadow box that I think I've mentioned before of, my dad's stuff. And, so when she moved into Rose Court from another section of Maris Grove, which is, again, this senior community, the other parts of Maris Grove are independent living. When my mom and dad moved in there, they moved into, it was a 1-bedroom apartment that had a nice sized living room and a den. The den was where my dad spent all the time watching TV. And, and then of course, it also had a dining room area and an eat-in kitchen. And, so when they moved there, my mom and dad could be as independent as they wanted. And there was, there was a cafe down the hall. There was a dining room down the hall and around the corner. They didn't eat too much in the dining room because the dining room was, I don't want to say it was like fine dining because, again, my mom was, never super thrilled with, with the food there. Early on, it was good, but, as time grew on and, people started, they started changing, the different folks, and they both didn't like to sit in the dining room because the dining room, it was a marathon. It was, an hour and a half, 2 hours for dinner. And, I don't want to say it was fancy, they didn't get dressed up or anything, but it just took too long. And both of them didn't want to sit and, linger while they ate dinner, where you could go to the cafe where you could get the same thing that was served in the dining room or a couple of other things, pizza or hamburgers or cheesesteaks or a few other things, and sometimes it rotated with some of the other stuff. And they like that better because it was in and out. You go up, you order the stuff, and they bring it out to you, and you're good. Kind of like almost like a quick serve type of place. Sometimes you could get, you can go up and get whatever it was right then and there, and they'd put it on a plate for you right then and there. But the one thing with the cafe, especially. Probably about 10 years ago. My parents moved in there probably 13 years ago. So around 10 or so years ago, they got this coffee machine. And my mom absolutely loved it. And so instead of making her coffee every morning, and she had this old percolator that she loved to the point where she used it so often, she'd burn out the cords for it, and I'd constantly be ordering cords from the manufacturer. And, once they switched to this, whatever this coffee machine was, and I can't remember, and I looked it up to see if they made a home version of it because it was a big unit and it wasn't anything that she could have in her place. And they didn't make a smaller version. It wasn't like an espresso or a Keurig or anything like that. Once she found this coffee, she was in heaven because she absolutely loved coffee and drank many cups per day. And as time has gone on, she's had, less and less and less. And obviously the last few weeks of her life, maybe she only had 2 or 3 cups a day. And I know at the very end, she stopped drinking it. But they had this machine that she loved. So especially once my dad died, she would go down in the morning, mid-morning, 10 o'clock or so, or 10:30, whenever they opened, and she'd get 2 cups of coffee. One she would usually drink then, and then one she'd drink, around lunchtime, maybe with lunch. And then once they opened, now when she really wanted coffee, she'd sometimes go down 3 times to get coffee. Once in the morning, once in the afternoon, around the time that was open for lunch. And then at dinner, she would get her, coffee came with, her meal. So she would get it then. So if she only went down twice, she would get 2 regular in the morning and then a decaf, 2 decafs with dinner. If she went down 3 times, she might get 2 regular in the morning, a regular and a decaf, at lunchtime, and then a decaf and a regular at dinner time. She would save that 1 regular for first thing in the morning before she could go down to get her her coffee in the morning. So she didn't have to rush down there. And so she just loved this coffee machine. Well, she had some sort of health issue a couple of years ago, and she had to go into the skilled nursing for, to do rehab. She was in there, and while she was in there, they took out that coffee machine, and that was devastating to my mom because when she got back, she's like, oh my God, the coffee is horrible here, and so forth and so on. Now, it happened to be around the time that Jane was finishing school for the year, and Jane had a Keurig machine. So we took my mom out the Keurig machine, and then we started playing around with the different coffees that you could get for that. And of course, there's 8 million different coffees you could get for that. And finally, she found one that she liked. So once we did that, she was good to go again. I don't remember why she didn't use the percolator much anymore. I don't remember if it was, I think it got too heavy, and I'll get into some of her health issues in a moment, but coffee is as much of her life as like I've told everybody, like you and I like air. That's how my mom liked coffee. And, so I think it just became too heavy for her to lift and pour, with everything she had going on. And, so when we got the Keurig and she found something she liked, she was good. So what would have been the deal breaker to move into Rose Court, even though she really needed to move into Rose Court when she did in January of 2018. She said, well, I have a Keurig machine. I can bring that, right? And they're like, well, probably not. Well, my mom said, well, I'm not going to come. I need to have coffee. Well, we have coffee there. No, if you have the same coffee that you have here, I don't want that. And so they allowed her to do it. She was the only one in the entire building that had this Keurig machine. And what was great about the Keurig machine, beside the fact that my mom could get up and get coffee whenever she wanted it, was the fact that she always invited the aides or the doctor or whoever, hey, yeah, come in whenever you need, grab a cup of coffee. So even when they weren't going in to check on my mom, maybe somebody was going in before their shift or the doctor was on the floor to look at somebody else, they would go in and grab a cup of coffee. And, in the case of the doctor, I don't know how often she would go in to see my mom, but, she probably saw my mom more because sometimes when she was up there, she knew she could go in and get a cup of coffee from her Keurig. Now, my mom and the doctor also had a love for NCIS, so they would always talk about that as well. And in fact, the Friday afternoon when the doctor was in, the doctor was telling her, come on, what do we know about NCIS for the next episode and so forth and so on. And, so the coffee and the, she said, I'm here to talk about NCIS and have some coffee. And of course, by that point, my mom was, she was sleeping the entire time. But just to rewind a little bit, when things started to go south for her, and again, she's had, she had COPD, she had osteoporosis, she had scoliosis, she had arthritis, and the arthritis was, what started to give her the trouble when she was over in independent living. And as I mentioned previously with, lifting the coffee pot and, she just couldn't grab it. She had trouble holding on to a fork to eat because her hands were so sore and swollen. And, and that's been going on for a few years. What was the final straw to get her into the assisted living was the osteoporosis. I know a couple of times she broke a vertebrae or two in her back. I think one time she coughed and that did it. Another time she just twisted funny to grab a pillow while she was laying down. And, it just made it almost impossible for her to move. And that's when she had to go over there and then have physical therapy. And let me tell you, she hated physical therapy. She just didn't feel the need for it. And she didn't like doing it. And again, she, as I've mentioned before, she was very, as the hospice, one of the hospice people told me, she said to me, your mom, if it takes her 3 hours to get dressed, will get dressed on her own without help. Somebody might be in there while she's doing it to make sure she doesn't fall or whatever, but she will do it on her own. And that was the bottom line, with my mom. She was very strong-willed and fought for things that, that she believed in. And, there's a lot of things that people will say or think about my mom, including us. And look, when I was a kid, my mom and I are very similar, and it always made my dad nervous. He would always say when we would bicker back and forth, he'd always go, "What are you guys going to do when I'm gone?" He said, "Are you going to fight like this?" And I said, "No, I won't fight like this because ba 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 ba." And I think it went okay after he died. I think I think I was the one to let more things go than my mom. But yeah, we always went back and forth. And as I said at the beginning today when I started this episode, I called her Ma, and I started doing that when I was in school, middle school, I guess. I don't think it was elementary school. My mom wasn't too fond of that. And the more she told me not to call her that, the more I called her that. And then finally she stopped, and I still did it because it was just at that point, it was one of those things, when you do something enough. And I think whether she liked it or not, that's what I called her. So when I walked in that day and I said, "Hey, Ma, how's it going?" She answered and was happy to, that I was there, just like she was happy. So again, that was Tuesday, and things were great to the point where, even though she woke up and she was blue, meaning the color blue, not sad, Hazel had even said to me that day, because she was joking with us all and, still, dishing it out while she was laying there. And Hazel said, "Oh, she's so full of life. She's in great shape," and so forth and so on. The next day, Wednesday, when I walked in there, it was the exact opposite. I mean, she was barely communicating. I walked in, I said, "Hey, Ma." She kind of gave me a, "Hey," back, and I said, and Wednesday was probably the worst day, that I ever had with her, because she was in such pain, and it was just awful. It was the worst thing I've ever witnessed in my life, because there was nothing I could do. There was nothing anyone could do to make her comfortable. To the point where I thought, well, couldn't they just give her too much of something to have her stop? It was just that awful. When I went back on Thursday, and I believe Margaret took me out there. That Margaret is my sister-in-law, Liz's sister. When I went out there on Thursday, I thought, I said to her, I hope it's not a replay of yesterday, because it was just so hard to watch. And she was crying out in pain. Again, on Wednesday, she didn't communicate much with me, but, just any little movement, and she was, oh God, oh God, oh God. And it was just heartbreaking for me, to watch. And I just don't want to see, it was just brutal. And I just thought, please, can't she just go? And it was so different also when I was there with her alone than when other folks were in there, because I felt like when I was with her by myself, I could be honest with her and, say things that I necessarily wouldn't say when the others are there. And I did. And, I told her, I said, it's okay to go. You don't have to keep suffering. And, she continued. Thursday, like I said, she didn't really communicate much, just type of thing. Now, I can tell you that late in the day on Thursday, I had texted with Jane, and one of the aides, I don't remember if it was Jen or June, I want to say it was Jen, suggested, why don't you see if, when you talk to Jane, why don't you, just let her talk to your mom too. And I said, okay, that's a good idea. So Jane was working late that night, as she has been for the last few weeks. And so, I texted Jane, and similarly to Liz, she misread my text. Sometimes when I text and I dictate everything, as I've probably mentioned before, Emily, my phone, Emily Latella, sometimes doesn't hear it exactly as I say it. So Jane read that my mom had a fever of 107, whereas what I said was 101.7, and it did say 101.7. So Emily did not get it wrong. Jane misread it. So Jane called me immediately, thinking, the end is very close. I'm going to call right now. So I said, Janie, you're too soon. Let me wait. They were in the last couple of days. They would go in and move my mom from one side to the other, so she wasn't constantly laying. And for whatever reason that was, I never asked. I don't know if it was for pain or if it was for circulation. I don't know. But once I got back in there, I texted Jane. I said, all right, whenever you're ready, give a call. And so she called. And so I was talking, and she was talking about her day. And that's all she basically was doing while she was, doing things at work. And we were talking, and my mom had a smile on her face listening to Jane. And, Jane actually kept it pretty good that day. Sometimes Jane will, like all of us, well, maybe not all of us, but like me, will say some inappropriate words or whatever. But that day it was good. And, my mom was happy that she was on. My mom never said anything or even, acknowledged, like you said, hey, how you doing? She was just smiling as Jane said certain things. And that part was great. That went over well. So, the next day, Friday, as things were going further south, I had said to Jacob in the morning, I said, my mom listened to Jane and I talk on the phone yesterday. Maybe, I'll text you if you have time before you go to work, and we just have a little conversation and she can listen in. So the same thing. So, I texted him. I said, if you're ready, give a call. And, or I called him actually. And we talked for a few minutes, and, and Jacob spoke to her a little bit. And again, she had a smile on her face, and she was happy to hear from him. Jacob, even though he was here and lived here the whole time, my mom was out there, didn't visit as often as Jane. Now, I've probably mentioned this, but Jane and my mom are like intergenerational twins. They are so similar, it is frightening. From the looks, from the way they look, to the way they act, and whether I've been able to manage it a little better or not. My mom had this thing called what we've dubbed the Hernandez Tone, and it was where she could give you a compliment, but it really didn't feel like one. Or she could say something that, even though it was kind, it sounded like she was, mad at you or being mean to you. And it's just how she was, and Liz worked with Jane when Jane was little, and, it's in Jane bad. They are frighteningly similar. To the point where when I was talking to my mom over the last week or so that we were there, I said, "When did you first come up to Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia area?" She said, "I was 19, and she was telling me the story. My mom was originally from the Tampa area, as she's corrected me on multiple occasions. While she lived in Tampa at some points in her life, when she was born, she did not live in the city proper. She lived in the Tampa area, which I guess now is called Tampa Bay. I don't think it was called Tampa Bay back then. Just like the area that I am in, while it's suburban Philadelphia, it's also called the Delaware Valley for the Delaware River. And so, while I've lived in the Delaware Valley almost my entire life, with the exception of the time that I lived in Miami while at school, my mom grew up in the Tampa area, and like I said, in some instances actually lived within the city limits of Tampa. And, so she was telling me that, and I said, "Well, how old were you?" She said, "I'm 19. It was, so, it's the late 40s that she came up. And then she ended up staying, and, then she met my dad, and, my mom was raised Roman Catholic, and, my mom and dad dated for 10 years, and 10 years of dating, I kind of think, and I don't know that I ever got the full story, I kind of think it wasn't my mom and dad that was having trouble getting married. I don't know if it was my dad, proposing or not wanting to propose because she wasn't Jewish. My mom, I believe, was always willing to convert, and I don't think she did until everything looked like it was going to be okay. So my mom did convert. And what I always tell people, I always thought my mom had that, almost like that Jewish motherly thing where, again, again, I call it the Hernandez Tone, and maybe, that's probably a little stronger than some of the, maybe a little bit different than, what the Jewish moms are like. But, my mom was very mixed with a lot of different, a background from, so my grandfather, her dad, was Cuban. My grandmother was born in the U.S. We were told of Irish blood, but as we found out, and I may have mentioned this, before Jane was looking for colleges, after Jacob was in school, but before Jane was, my mom said, "Oh yeah, my mom once told me we had Native American blood." Well, and if I say Native American blood, she said Indian blood. And I'll tell you a funny story in a minute about, again, a different generation, different way of putting things. I'll tell you another story in a second. So of course, when we heard that, we thought, okay, Native Americans, let's see if it's true, and if it is, if it's enough to help Jane get into a better school or something like that. And Jane did the DNA test, and it was a decent amount, and probably more than Elizabeth Warren, but not enough to help get into a college or open a casino. So there was that, and so my mom did the DNA test later on, and she actually was, I want to say it was 4 or 5%, as far as Native American blood goes in those things. And it was kind of surprising. Another surprising thing, just to finish the thought of the DNA test that my mom had. She actually was a percent or two of Ashkenazi Jew, which we all found hysterical because, like I said, she was Roman Catholic and was not Jewish until she married my dad. And which I found out the other day when we were at the service at the funeral. I found out what her Jewish name was because the rabbi had asked me when we met if I knew what her Hebrew name was, and I didn't. And he told me he found the paperwork for when she converted. Her name was Ura, her Hebrew name, and Ura means light. And I just found that very interesting, and I liked it. I thought that was great. But to go back to the thought where, my mom often, and I think we find this, I know my friend Alex, he goes through similar things with his mom, and I think it's just the generation. Again, I mentioned that Jen and June were, my mom got very close to them over the time that she was there, and to the point where sometimes when they were out and about, if they were near, they would come in and visit her, like I said. And a while back, June brought her husband in with her because I don't know if they were out that way and they stopped in to say hello. And my mom loved, his name is Bruce. My mom loved him just as much as June and thought, what a good looking guy and how June is lucky to have somebody like that and so forth and so on. She would tell me. But the other day she's talking to June and I kind of cringed. And again, it's a different generation. But my mom said to June, what a happy black man. And I thought, I wouldn't say that today. I would just say, what a happy man. And I just thought it was funny. And she repeated it a few times. And again, my mom didn't mean any disrespect. It's just how, they noticed, those generations would say those things. Whereas, like, to me, first of all, I'm happy if I could tell if what color someone is, let alone be able to, and I certainly wouldn't say, what a happy black man. Man, that guy's happy, I would say, or look at, and I just thought, it kind of pinpointed, that whole generational thing, where, my dad and his friends would talk and they would say, oh, that Italian or that Polish guy or that whatever, whereas we say that guy. And I just thought it was funny. I just thought it's, again, from a different time. And, there's things that go on today that, Jane was telling us the story about someone that she works with said she was bullied, meaning not Jane said she was bullied. This other girl that Jane works with, someone who is a little bit older than Jane, but in the same position as Jane has at this company. And she said she was bullied because her supervisor, the person who is above her, told her what to do. Hey, you've got to do this, this, and this. And she called that bullying. And, oh my God, I could hear my dad laughing from the other side. And I know, and I never talked about it with my mom, but I know she would think that's funny too, because, they worked their whole lives, they owned businesses and, so it was just a different time. And, she meant nothing bad about calling him a happy black man. It's just how it was, again, I know today I would just say he's a happy man or a happy guy. I usually use the word guy more than man, and I probably wrongly use the word girl rather than woman or lady, which, is probably bad. But it's just how I am. It's guys and girls. If there's a group of people together that are mixed, I say guys. Hey, guys, how you doing? So please don't take any offense to that. I'm usually pretty informal and maybe sometimes too informal. I've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks, all the different, funny things that happened with my mom or, and as the rabbi said, it wasn't, whether for good or bad, it was, just the way my mom was, the way that, as I grew up, I remember coming home from school and she'd be sitting at a table in our den, and our den was basically a family room or a rec room, if you will, in a split level house down at the bottom. we had this table there, and my mom would sit there with a book and a cup of coffee and cigarettes. And, I could see if she had been sitting, like I knew that she hadn't started dinner yet, because sometimes I'd walk in or walk up to the door, and through the screen door that most of the year had a, plexiglass, glass in it. And I could see a haze of smoke from my mom's cigarette smoke. And, thinking about that and thinking that, hey, she lived to 90 after smoking like that for decades. It's just incredible. And it's, obviously some of the things she has wrong with her. Number one, the COPD. That's what, what went on with that. And that's, clearly why she had that. But the coffee was always her big thing, and reading was another big thing. That was the only thing she wanted to do on a consistent basis over the, even before my dad died. We would take them out. We'd go out to lunch or dinner, and then we'd go to Barnes and Noble. And then we'd go, if my dad wanted to go somewhere, which he never did, he would just go wherever we said we were going to go. He was always okay with that, unless he needed, a pair of shoes or whatever. But he was always, any place was good. But that was the thing. We took my mom, especially after he died. That was the big thing. Saturdays we'd go out there, we'd get her, and there were times that it was really tough. She had trouble getting into our car. We've had an SUV since the early '90s, or since 1990, and sometimes I had to give her a little push up, to help her get into the car, and it just got harder and harder. And it's funny. When I posted on Facebook the other day that she had died, I put a picture up. The picture I put up was from our wedding. It was a good picture. I was going to use one of the pictures that I took with her, over the last, 8 or 10 years. But, I thought, I got to have something nicer than that. And I did. And it was a picture of just her at our wedding, and Liz and I, and from 1990, June 10th, from when it was. And she looked pretty good. And she was dressed obviously very nicely, and it was just a nice image. But reading all the people that, sent their condolences, one of them was a person named Sophia, and Sophia grew up around the corner from me. It was I guess a year behind me in school, but, she was, just around the corner, probably, 8 or 10 houses down. And, at one point, my mom hated when we would take her to the bookstore and we would just linger with her. I can do this. Go do something else, she would say. And even to the end, when she was using a walker when we were out and about, she'd grab the books. Now, she did have trouble. Again, she was pretty short. She did have trouble reaching the top shelf, and sometimes needed help. But on one occasion, we took her into the bookstore and got her situated, and then said, "Okay, Helen, we're going to go." I said, "Okay, Mom." Liz said, "Okay, Helen. We're going to go," and we had to get something maybe at the mall, Concord Mall in Wilmington, or sometimes at the Best Buy, or if Jane was with us, she'd want to go to Ulta, which is right next door to where the Barnes & Noble was. So we'd leave her, and at one point, we came back. One time we came back and she said, "Yeah, I had trouble." And I don't remember exactly what happened. I don't remember if she had fallen or if she had dropped all her books on the floor. But this person, she's saying, "Oh, this nice girl helped me out," and blah, blah, blah. I said, "Somebody that works at the store?" And she's like, "No, just another customer." I later found out that it was this girl, Sophia, who, like I said, grew up around the corner. We're friends on Facebook and so forth. And I think Liz ended up putting 2 and 2 together that it was her, because we never saw her by the time we got back in there. And it just kind of made me smile that, just some of the memories, thinking about that. Another person who had sent their condolences was someone who never met my mom, named Susan. And she said, "I'll hold her in the light." And then when I found out that, her name was Aura, which means light, I just thought, wow, that's pretty funny. And I know some people say that. I know that was a big Friends thing. They always did that at Meeting for Worship when the kids were in school, either at Westtown or Friends Central. But just thinking about and thinking about my mom sitting at the table, and I'm still friendly with a family. They grew up around a different way around the corner, named the Sparklers, and our families were friendly, and the mother and father, Larry and Barbara and my mom were buddies. And, so I'd come home from school and they might be sitting at that table smoking cigarettes, or on the porch smoking cigarettes, talking, or thinking about going to the mall. And, I just think about that, and, it just made me smile, and, how much my mom enjoyed doing that. And, just thinking back to the different things, other friends had said, sent their condolences, made me think of some other things. They were all triggers of some happy memories. One of the funniest stories that I can think of with my mom, most Saturday nights, my parents would go out, whether it was with another couple or a group of people. And as I got older, and even before I was older, they would, I'd have a babysitter and they would go out, and they didn't do it every Saturday night, just, on occasion. I don't remember why they didn't have a babysitter, but they used to take me to the movies, and sometimes they were R-rated movies, and they may or may not have been appropriate for, a kid my age, 10, 12 years old, maybe. I don't even think I went after that, but, maybe even a little younger. And I will never forget, and I'm not sure what movie it was. Could have been Papillon, could have been Day of the Dolphin, but there was this scene. So we get to the movies early, and back in the day, the movie theaters had windows so you could see into the movie, so you didn't fling the door open and nail somebody who's waiting to come in. So we're sitting there waiting, and, we got there probably a little too early. So the movie was still playing in where we're going to go, and I'm watching through the doorway, and there is this guy who has a machine gun in his hand, but he is getting literally blown to bits by somebody else shooting him with a machine gun, and blood is spattering, and there's blood all over the wall, and he's up against the wall, like when you're shooting somebody, almost like they're dancing, there's so many bullets going into them. And my mom comes up to me and she goes, "David," like, again, with that tone, I thought I was in trouble. She's like, don't watch that. That's going to ruin the movie for you. You're going to know how it ends now. And I thought she was going to yell at me for seeing that. And I started thinking lately, the other day when I was thinking about that story, it was never a thing. If I wanted to go see a movie, they always allowed me pretty much whatever I wanted to do, I did. And, obviously being visually impaired, to play baseball, I wanted to do it, and yeah, go ahead. And they always let me. And my mom was probably a little more nervous than my dad to letting me do it. But it was certainly, they agreed to it, and they were good with it. The coaches might have been nervous as could be to play me, especially in the infield, and that was the only place I had a chance to see the ball at that time. Now, today, I probably wouldn't see it at all. But just stories like that just make me laugh and smile. And, there's obviously other ones that, are a little more colorful, or a little more, again, like I said, my mom and I, we didn't always see eye to eye. And, one of the things that I joke with my other blind and visually impaired friends, I've been visually impaired my entire life. And, we would go out and we would see a plane, or I'd hear a plane and my mom would see it in the sky. I'm like, "Where is it, Mom? I can't see it." She's like, "It's right over there." I'm like, "Where?" And then she'd point. And, when I was a kid, I could probably see her pointing. But I'm like, "Where? I don't see it." She said, "It's right there." And, so now there's a running joke in my family, when I don't see something, I'm like, "Where?" And they'll, Liz or the kids will go, "It's right there." And so, it makes us laugh. And, and my mom never, even to this day, I guess towards over the last few years, she probably realized, she's like, "Oh yeah, you probably can't see that." But for a good chunk of my life, she never thought of me as being visually impaired ever, I don't think. And, even though, in school I had, I was in a visually impaired room in public school. And then I had, if I needed them in middle school and high school, I had help. But it's just one of those funny things that here's this. I mean, who would know me better than my mom? And she would always, oh yeah, I forgot. You can't see that. Yeah, I mean, my whole life, it's not like it just happened. Another funny story. My dad would do certain things, and my mom would see him. I remember specifically one time my dad was on the top step of a ladder, which of course you're not supposed to stand on, and something was going on with a gutter or something out at our house, and my mom came out and saw him on that and said, "Josh, what are you doing? Blah blah blah. You're going to break your neck." And that was that, and "you're going to catch pneumonia" were probably her catchphrases of anything, because my dad and I would go outside and play with the dogs sometimes in the snow. We wouldn't have coats on. And she would, she would yell at us and it was just, they were her two things. And the other day at her funeral, it was a pretty raw, cold day and we were all pretty bundled up. But one of the things that I mentioned, I said, I guess we shouldn't, stay out here too long or we're all going to catch pneumonia. That was her big thing. And funny thing was, my dad actually, about a year before he died, actually did fall and break a vertebrae in his neck. And I said to him, I said, "Dad," I said, "Mom finally got it. She finally was right with that." And, so hopefully none of us get pneumonia because I don't want her to be right with that. But it is a great loss for us. And, I'm not going to lie, it was, as she got older, it was more difficult because, especially before she moved into assisted living, we had to go out there, when things weren't going good for her and, she couldn't get up. We had to go out there every day and get her food. And finally, we convinced her to get some help, to get the food. They offered that service there. But my mom, again, was very independent. Obviously, as she, at 19, she left her home and came up here, couple thousand miles away, 1,500 miles away, whatever it is, from Tampa to Philly. And I realized, especially over the last few years without my dad, I realized that a lot of the traits that we thought I got, were my dad's, were really not, were really my mom's. And then it made us think, when my dad got tired of doing something, he would just say, "Oh, that's it, I'm done." And case in point, they had an apartment down in Florida that when they sold it, my dad didn't really want to bring too much of the stuff up here. He just wanted to get rid of it, give it to people. He didn't even want to bother selling it. And so there was a painting that Liz and I wanted desperately. And finally we convinced my mom, because my dad was, "Nope, we're not bringing that. We're not bringing it. We're done. I'm done." And I talked to my mom. I said, "Mom, convince Dad to ship that painting up here." And he did. And, so for the longest time, it hung in their apartment in Wallingford and then their apartment in Maris Grove. And then when my mom moved from that apartment, a couple of years ago, it's here in our apartment now. And, we're happy about that. And, and that's what would happen with my dad. He didn't, he would, once he got to the point where he was tired of doing it, he was done. And where my mom was not like that. Like I mentioned earlier, if it took my mom 3 hours to dress herself, she did it. And that's how they knew, especially at the end, that, it was getting closer because, she would ask for help to get dressed and, or not even bother. She'd spend the whole day in bed. But even on even a couple days before she died, Monday or Tuesday, she was sitting in the chair and, sitting in a chair watching TV, eating. And, so, we were all wondering, did they get it right or not? Because again, there was just a great amount of pain, for the last few years. They had tried morphine, a couple of months ago, and, my mom jokes about it, but she said, "Please don't give that to me again. I was hallucinating." She thought June was floating on the ceiling, and she just hated the way she felt. And again, another with her outlook, she was on oxycodone for quite a while, and she said, "I don't want to get addicted to it." We're like, "Mom, whatever. If it makes you feel better, it makes you feel better." She said, "Yeah, but I don't want to get addicted. That's bad if you get addicted." And again, at that stage of her life, she was still worried about stuff like that. So she was a very special and unique individual, and that's the best way to put it. And as the doctor said to me the other day, when she gave me her condolences before she was dead, and I knew that the end was coming, she said, she is a legend here. And, everybody loved her for the most part. There were, like I said, some that, butted heads with her. And everybody was so sad as she was going and would come in and hug me or hug Liz. And, the end was for the best because, again, the pain was just excruciating, even with the morphine. And they kept doubling the morphine over the course of the last couple of days or few days, as well as the fentanyl patch and everything else. It was just so horrible to see that ending. And, it was nice to hear from all those people that sent their condolences, on Facebook and, with, it made me think of funny stories. They might not have brought them up, but it made me think of them. The Hernandez, the original Hernandez Tone in our family is gone, but like I said, it does live on with me and especially with Jane. So just keep that in mind, So I did want to pay some tribute to my mom. She lived 90 years. As she said, she lived a good full life, and she did. She read many books and drank many more cups of coffee, and I'm sure until she quit a decade or two ago, smoked many cigarettes. And but we will miss her. And but like I said, it's for the better because of the pain. And I do appreciate you listening to this episode 53 of the iCantCU podcast. My name is David, @DavidBenge on all the socials. Please rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And just think about my mom when you're getting a cup of coffee or seeing somebody still smoking a cigarette in this day and age. And I do appreciate listening, and I do appreciate all the well wishes. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to the iCantCU podcast. Follow David on Twitter. He is @DavidBenge.